You know, I grew up, and welcome to this Saturday edition of the Armstrong Williams Show. When I grew up, my parents really instilled in us not to look at anyone in terms of race, their gender, their socioeconomic status, and whether that's wealth, middle class, or poverty. We grew up believing that character, a person's word, a person's actions, a person's work ethic, and how they care for their family and their neighbors tells you everything that you need to know about them. So for me, when I think about what is going on in Israel today and with Hamas and the way they just massacred people, I don't see people as Jewish. I don't see Israel. I see humanity. And any humanity that is treated in that way, we should be outraged. I was not outraged over George Floyd's death because he was black. Some would say that he looks like me. No, I was outraged because this happened to a human being. But there's a mindset in the world today that our outrage is more overwhelming depending upon what someone looks like, depends on their gender, their sexual choice. But to me, that is very limiting and very dangerous. So, you know, I watched this socialist rally in New York City showcase the lowest ebb of human decency this week. I mean, people quite literally celebrating the rape and slaughter of innocent Israeli women and children. You know what? You can love your country, but you also condemn the actions of savages, barbaric behavior. These are not mutually exclusive. The people celebrating killings, mocking the dead, I mean, people see them as monsters and nothing else. How can you feel anything good about someone being savagely beaten or hurt and harmed for no reason at all? Forget about their race. So you know what? Because this is becoming so pervasive in this country, I invited someone on today in this first segment, my good friend, my brother, a person who's God-fearing, being Crump, to talk about this. Because even when I saw Black Lives Matter out of Chicago posted online a silhouette of a Hamas militant paragliding with the caption, "I stand with Palestine." Remember this, Hamas, Palestine have no history of being paragliders. They didn't win some world paragliding competition. They aren't known for inventing paragliding. No, the only instance of them paragliding was when they paraglided into Israel and slaughtered 260 innocent teenagers and young adults who gathered there to support peace in the Middle East. And so, you know, I invited my man Crump on. Let's try to get an understanding of where is this coming from and how do we change it. It is very dangerous, my brother.
Well, Armstrong, I'm happy to be with you to continue to try to encourage all members of society to make their objective to be peace, to make their objective to be tolerance, to make their objective to respect their fellow human beings, their fellow brothers and sisters, regardless of their skin color, their ethnicity, their religious beliefs, or their sexual preferences. Let's respect them all as human beings. Right now, I am preaching and praying and cheering for humanity to rise above all the chaos that's happening in that part of the world. And I pray constantly for peace in the Middle East because I'm sure those families there want their children and their loved ones to be able to live in a safe environment where they're free of murder and rape and kidnapping. They just want what we all want, our families to be able to live, to learn, and to love, and to grow.
Can just imagine this, America. Imagine, and our brother Ben Crump represented the family of George Floyd. Just imagine when you saw Derek Chauvin's knee on George's neck that whites decided to go out and have a march and rally celebrating the fact that Derek Chauvin killed George Floyd. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine after Al-Qaeda and hit the Twin Towers in New York that Putin issued some kind of memorandum celebrating Al-Qaeda for destroying America's way of life? Listen, you've got to have compassion because, listen, there's so many innocent Palestinians who don't reflect what their leaders, Hamas, are doing. It's always, 95% of the time, innocent civilians always die at these wars and these conflicts and wars that these people never chose. They had no decision in that process. When are we going to find the best of our humanity, Attorney Crump?
Well, we're going to find it when great leaders, not leaders who are trying to gain political expediency, but great leaders find a way to bring people together versus dividing us. It's always easy, Armstrong Williams, to divide people, but why we call leaders like Martin Luther King and like Gandhi great is because they were able to bring people together. They were able to bring people to the table. And even though they may have had disagreements, they were not disagreeable. Right now in society, we seem to be slipping into a facade that if you don't agree with me, then I must hate you. No, that's not how we are able to give our children a better world. We have to give our children a better world where we champion diplomacy, we champion diversity, we champion intellect. And those are the things that are most important now. We have to champion humanity now more than ever in the Middle East, in the United States, and all over the world. And what is humanity? Humanity is looking at a fellow human being and seeing the best in them, not seeing the worst in them.
It really comes down to an issue of morality. I know your mother, I know your family, and one of the things and you knew my family, one of the things that they stressed to us was morality. You have what is called as legal, you have what is called as ethical, which is ethical, but morality transcends it all because there's something within us that if we see a child suffering, we feel like we want to do something. If we see somebody being kidnapped or harmed, or we see these images on TV, you say, oh my, what in the name of God is happening to us? What is happening to us? You want to care for one another because you never know what you're going to need and who you're going to need to care for you or to bring you out of your strife someday. No one else ever know who's going to rescue us or save us during our time of despair, Attorney Crump.
Yeah, and it makes you quote Marvin Gaye, what's going on? Because right now, we have to talk about getting back to our moral compass. When we think about what Dr. King put in that letter from the Birmingham jail, he said, we can't call ourselves good people. We can't call ourselves moral people when we see injustice and we look the other way. He said, if you're going to call yourself a good person, you can't see evil and evil acts and look the other way and say that don't involve me and my family. So now when we see violence, no matter who is committing the violence, we have a moral obligation as moral people to speak up and to condemn it, to not be silent, because silence is betrayal to humanity.
I think what some people, when they're watching you today and they're hearing you and seeing you as never before, they say, well, Attorney Crump always represents black people because they're always being abused and disrespected and killed by either police officers or the other whites. No, you represent people who have faced injustices through bigotry and through ignorance. And it's just not about black people. There are people of all walks of life that you represent because your purpose and what you do in the legal world, you represent people that have been disenfranchised, and your responsibility is make sure that they get justice and find some way to help them heal those wounds from those injustices. It's not black and white.
It's never been about black and white. It has always been about equality and justice for all. And that's not exclusive to any race, any ethnicity, any religion. It's about equality. It's about trying to say that I want my children too to have an equal opportunity at the American dream. I want my children too to have an equal opportunity to live out the fulfillment of destiny that God has for them. And Armstrong, you are so right, my brother, and we often talk about these things. We have to always speak truth to power, no matter what the truth is. We have to be courageous enough to say it. I mean, that's what true leaders do. And now, I believe we always have to try to be diplomatic. You always have to try to be respectful. And when you speak truth to power, one thing I never do is try to yell, Armstrong. I try to speak truth to power. And if it is the truth, you don't have to yell. You can say it as plainly, as calmly as possible, because everybody in their hearts know what the right thing is to do. And the only question ever is, do you have the courage to do the right thing, even when it's unpopular, even when they call you controversial, even when they say you will be attacked for it? Well, the great leaders still speak truth. And that's why you and I always have enlightened conversations, because I appreciate when you speak the truth, and I hope you appreciate when I speak the truth. And I know we don't always agree on things, but we at least agree to learn from one another and to listen to one another. That's what we need in the world now. That's what we need in the Middle East. That's what we need in America. We need to try to listen to one another and learn from one another versus just condemning and attacking one another.
You know, Attorney Crump couldn't have said it better. I don't really care about his politics and whether he's a Democrat. I value the fact that he was created by the same God that created me. He's a human being. He's decent. He's for the greater good. And greater good can come from anybody. And the greater good does not wear labels, and they're not stereotypes. So I so much appreciate Attorney Crump joining us today to bring a voice of understanding and reasoning to heal these wounds that we're seeing all around the world. Attorney Crump, thank you so much for joining us, brother.
Thank you, Armstrong, for using your influence on the world stage today.
Thank you, and we'll be back. And welcome back to the broadcast. Tyler O'Neill is managing editor of the Daily Signal, and we welcome him to the broadcast along with Patricio Nukwa, even though I don't see Patricio Nukwa. But Tyler, let me just start with you. Let's talk about the fact that Scalise needs about 107 votes, and so much can change since the taping of our broadcast. Do you think that this is going to go into next week? Do you think it's going to change? Do you think that even former Speaker Kevin McCarthy can rise again in this process?
Well, I think many things can happen. We don't know the future. I would expect the House to get its ducks in a row in the next few days. I don't think this is going to last until next week. There's a chance it could, but I think seeing what has happened in Israel and seeing, the American people are anxious for leadership, and House Republicans know that they need to get a speaker across the finish line sooner rather than later.
Andrew Donaldson, your perspective on this?
I agree. This is actually a political problem that has diverged from the optics problem. And right now, the biggest problem the GOP House has is terrible, terrible optics. They know they can't do another extended speaker fight. And yet here they are in the middle of it. This vote with Scalise was an absolute disaster because he's nowhere close. That means he not only doesn't have support, he has organized resistance from somewhere in the party, believing which reports you want to believe. That may be the McCarthy camp or others, maybe hoping to bring him back in like you referenced. But yeah, they got to get this fixed, and they got to get it fixed quick. They've got to get whatever they're going to do internally fixed quickly. the optics are absolutely killing them, and they're getting worse by the day.
You know, Tyler, I know you're not going to be with us long. What is suffered and sacrificed with the House not having a Speaker of the House?
Yeah, well, this takes some time. They have to address serious issues. And look, there is a potential that this speaker battle could end up making the Republicans more effective going into the spending negotiations, the fight that's coming up in the middle of next month. But what we need to see is them getting things in a row and getting boots on the ground. And the main thing that we focus at the Heritage Foundation is we want to see, a return to 2022 fiscal year spending at the very least. We also want to see a serious plan, if we can, to address the debt crisis that we have in this country. It's a very serious problem, and so far Congress has been kicking the can down the road. And we also want not to have more Ukraine funding without oversight, without a clear answer to where this money is going, how it's helping the war effort in Ukraine, and what Americans can count on, and what frankly we're looking for, what the end goal is, because Ukraine right now looks like a quagmire, and we all want to see Ukraine victorious if it's feasible. But at the end of the day, Americans have to make decisions on money. And if you look at the world right now, Israel is in dire straits and doesn't have the support of as many countries that will send money and help their efforts as Ukraine does. So Ukraine can count on many other countries in Europe, and they should be bucking up and meeting what the U.S. is giving to Ukraine as well. Whereas with Israel, we are the number one ally, and they are one of our number one allies. And so we have to be focused on sending our dollars where it's going to make the best bang for our buck across the world. And right now, that's looking a lot more like Israel than it does Ukraine.
But am I hearing you say that you believe there should be support for Ukraine in terms of American dollars because you don't want Putin to find himself in Europe and places like Germany, and whatever they're doing, many people believe there's a mindset, they're slowing him down, and he's clearly distracted. He's had these ambitions for a long time. It's just how the money is being spent instead of no money at all. Is that what you're saying?
Well, there are a few concerns. One is not all of the money has been spent. Two is we don't know exactly how it has been spent. I've been hearing reliable reports that the money is funding Ukrainian civil service pensions as opposed to efforts on the ground to fight Putin. That's a serious problem because if we are sending money, and look, Congress has allocated funds to Ukraine. This is something the American people are already invested in. The question is further funding, not whether we're funding the issue at all. And I think when it comes to further funding, we have a lot of questions that need to be answered.
I noticed in the things that you're concerned about, you mentioned nothing about the invasion of our borders.
Yes. Well, one of the main things, actually, and thank you for bringing that up, because one of the main priorities we have in this spending fight, and in the speaker fight, we want a speaker who's going to stand up for American citizens and for the borders of this country. We had the House pass H.R. 2. That's a very strong statement that the Biden administration has gone overboard, that they need to be reined in, that they need to be forced. Biden admitted recently that Congress allocated funds to the building of the border wall that he had to direct to that funding. And so he actually built some of the wall, even though he personally opposes it. That's what we need to see more of from Congress. And any sort of spending deal, and the Heritage Foundation has been clear on this, any sort of spending deal needs to include provisions, ideally the entirety of H.R. 2, but at the very least provisions that will secure our southern border from what we're seeing. And I mean, this is an effective invasion. And we witnessed last weekend with the invasion of Israel, with this Hamas terrorist incursion. At our southern border, we have many many illegal aliens from countries of terror concern that CBP, that DHS knows about. And so we need to seriously address that. We have to focus our efforts on finding those needles in the haystack, because we don't want in the United States of America today something like what happened in Israel over the weekend.
You know, I appreciate your joining us. I know you're on the tight times constraints today. Appreciate your being with us. Let me go to you, Andrew. Is George Santos a con artist?
I think he would have to move up in the world 2 or 3 spots to reach the level of con artist, and we should not besmirch the good con artists out there for what this feller is. I don't know we've really seen anything like him in public office. Everything about him is at least highly questionable at best. He sure does seem to be an opportunist. He has an extremely shady past. He seems to lie about absolutely everything he says, and anything he says you can't take for granted at all. If this man quoted John 3:16, I would be obliged to go check the source documentation on it, or if he told me the sky was blue, I'd walk outside and check. Yeah, he's totally a con artist. It's an embarrassment. Now, there was no legal mechanism to keep him from taking his seat. GOP should have immediately expelled him. They didn't. Now they're talking about maybe trying to do it now with the new batch of indictments. We'll see if that goes, but the other mess plays into that of not having current leadership. We'll see what happens, but it's an embarrassment, and the GOP's just kind of stuck with the embarrassment because they didn't nip it in the bud to start with.
Now, this guy charges $16,000 to somebody else's credit card. He loans himself $500,000 and put it in an account to make his opposition think that he had serious money. And when you really investigate it, it only had $8,000 to his name. I mean, it's just baffling to me. And obviously, the Democratic congressman that he's ousted, Andrew, has said that he is definitely running again. And it looks like that the margins that the GOP has had in the Congress is about to get thinner.
Yeah, the GOP Congress in general is in real trouble in this next cycle. But if I was the Democratic Party, I'd probably get somebody else, because as bad as George Santos is, if he beats you, you probably don't need to be running for much of any elected office anyway, even if nobody really knew anything about him and it was just a protest vote. They should probably run somebody else. He's going to get a GOP challenger. That'll be a competitive seat, and we'll see what happens. But to your larger point, this is a bad optic on a caucus and on a GOP party that's going to have a very tough time holding on to the House GOP. They need to excise this kind of stuff if they're going to have any chance of maintaining their majority.
You know, when we come back, we're going to get Bruce Fein's input in this conversation, what he's been listening to. I'm Armstrong Williams, and we'll be back. You know, I'm just reading this headline, Bruce, that the Palestinian Authority withdraws from Qatar funding scheme to Gaza.
Well, I think that means that the Palestinian Authority feels that they're no longer able, to offer any kind of humanitarian aid or alleviation of all the plight in Gaza. You may recall in 2006, when there was an election in Gaza, the Palestinian Authority lost to Hamas. Then we said we wouldn't recognize the election. So the Palestinian Authority, I think, has been wallpaper for many, many years, and what it says and does is really almost irrelevant to what happens in the West Bank and Gaza.
You know, we were listening to Tyler O'Neill from the Heritage Foundation. Just how severe is this crisis with the House leadership? And where do you see this, how do you see this playing out?
Well, I don't think that the crisis is in the House of Representatives. After all, the absence of leadership, which could be changed by rule, simply says you can't actually do work. Legislation can't be voted on in the House. Some say we should have the House be voting for more military assistance to Israel now. It can't be done under the existing rule, because we just have an interim speaker. But you could change the House rules to permit the interim speaker to call items to the floor. But in the absence of a speaker, it doesn't mean there are not negotiations going on between other members as to how to try to kick the ball down the road or resolve it after the 45-day continuing resolution expires, I believe on November 15th or something. So those kind of communications can continue. But I think if we look historically, it has been more the rule than the exception that Congress kicks the ball down the road. I remember Congressman Thomas Massey, who was a friend of mine, said he once changed one of the bills to call it the kick the can down the road bill, because they have a very difficult time getting a consensus on finding budgets that, one, at least purport to rein in the budgets that are now running annual $2 trillion deficits atop a $33 trillion national debt, which is not going to be sustainable in the long run. So we just don't know. But, you know, listen.
Let me interject something else here. You know, I want to talk about Hamas and these hostages and Israel's continued bombardment. It is obvious, unlike the United States, Israel has made a decision that they cannot save the scores of people, women, children, and soldiers who are being held hostage. And as they wreak this collateral damage on Gaza, they will also die. I mean, it's obvious they made that calculation, because the only thing Hamas is saying, if you continue to fire, we're going to continue to kill your hostages.
Well, I think what Hamas has stated, if you don't give warning to civilians before you bomb them, all those civilians don't really have any place to go anyway. They shut down all the exit
But that's
points.
not even realistic.
Of course it's not realistic. I
Give
don't think.
warning.
Yeah, I mean, these are not times where you are doing a fake fire drill or something like that.
But it's obvious their interpretation of hostages and how they deal with them is quite different from the United States.
Well, I'm not sure that's true. I mean, one time I remember the Israelis traded one hostage for 400 terrorists who were sitting in Israeli prisons. This was several years ago. It's matters of degree. We have our own Hostages Act. It's an 1868 Hostages Act, and it directs the president to do everything short of war to try to undertake efforts to retrieve any of our citizens that are held hostages. And we have some of our citizens are over there. It's not just Israelis who are held hostage. But I want to say that to provide at least some balance of this, evil is very seldom just on one side. And I was rather stunned to hear the Israeli defense minister say, no food, no electricity, no food. We are dealing with animals.
Bernie Sanders spoke out against this.
Excuse me?
Bernie Sanders spoke out against this.
Yes, okay, but this is, I mean, all I'm saying is that, as we said it earlier in the program, these are human beings. They're good human beings on all sides here who are getting slaughtered. It's very regretful. And unfortunately, simply words do very little to relieve their plight. So this could be a long haul. It's not altogether clear to me that the Israelis will go ahead and all the hostages will die. They may be. They may not be. But Israel has always in the past shown great flexibility in getting something back in exchange for a single Israeli soldier.
Andrew, does this tell Americans that we should be at high alert? We saw the Iranian parliament dancing and celebrating the deaths and saying death to Israel and death to America. Do you think that there could possibly be another terrorist attack on American soil like 9/11?
We should always be vigilant. Iran has done that since the Shah fell. They do that every Friday. The Ayatollah usually leads those in person, those chants. This is nothing new. Of course, we should always be vigilant. The reality is we're not. We let our guard down. Things like 9/11 happen. Obviously, the Israelis here, despite, one of the best intelligence services in the world, they got caught flat-footed, and we'll see what happens with the reports on that. You always have to be vigilant. There is always wolves out there that no matter what you do are going to come to you. So what do? You have to be prepared, and you have to decide ahead of time, not when the attack comes, not when the bombs fell, not when the gunmen show up, how you're going to respond to such things. And that's something we can't control when we get attacked, but we can control how we prepare, and we can decide ahead of time how we're going to respond. What we were just talking about here, proportional responses. Yes, it's fun to say you want to make Gaza a parking lot, but there's 2 million people in there. Most of them are human shields to Hamas. So no, you're not really going to do that. You have to decide ahead of time. Yes, we're going to have righteous anger. Yes, we're going to try to get some justice and right in the world, but we also have to be a little measured. And don't forget that if you are the aggrieved, you don't want to become the bad guy and trying to get revenge only. You have to be proportional. That's part of the responsibility of power.
Yeah.
What is Secretary Blinken trying to accomplish during his time in Israel now?
To be candid, he's trying to make a campaign statement for Joe Biden in 2024. That's what this is about. It's politics. He's not done anything different than go over there, and he'll probably have photo ops with Netanyahu, and it'll be an effort by Biden in 2024 to show how solid he is with Israel. If Trump's the Republican nominee, we know that Trump is oftentimes supported by the Jews because he moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. He recognized sovereignty over the West Bank and Golan Heights and things like that. So it's really a political maneuver. There's not offering any diplomatic objective. There's no solution there. In one sense also, the United States, because of the very, I thought, one-sided statement made by Mr. Biden, how can we claim that we're a neutral arbiter to try to negotiate some kind of ceasefire? We're not neutral. I don't know whether there's any country in the world right now that's neutral, which is a tragedy and why this is going to persist. I would make one observation where I think the greatest danger point here is to bleed over into Iran, and Israel and Iran having even the possibility of nuclear exchanges over this particular issue. Remember?
Let me interrupt you for 1 minute. I'm glad you mentioned that, because keep this in mind. Sources, credible sources, have found at the highest level of Iranian power, they were unaware and totally blindsided by this attack.
Well, that may be, but we don't know. But it's surely true that Iran and Hezbollah have been giving the Palestinians lots of money. Whether they knew they were plotting with this arms is another matter. But they're very, very close. And why is that? Because Iran is an enemy of Israel. Israel is an enemy of Iran. And so they support each other's opponents, if you will. So just the fact that they may not have known, maybe their Palestinian Authority didn't know either. This is not like an organized army, that has a hierarchy and chain of command and they give orders. So things may happen and they may not have known because the Palestinians, Hamas, wanted to keep this secret because they thought the more people knew, the more likely it would leak out to the Israelis.
Earlier in the week I had a chance to sit down with the Deputy Chief of Missions for the Israeli Embassy, Eliav Benjamin. If we have enough time after we go to break and come back to the Deputy Ambassador, we'll see if we have time for comments. We're going to come back, and when we come back, we're going to share with you our conversation with Mr. Benjamin on the other side of this break. If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. Eliav Benjamin is the Deputy Chief of Missions at the Embassy of Israel in Washington, D.C., and he joins us to give us perspective on just the chaos, the devastation of what's going on in his beloved Israel. Thank you so much for joining us, and tell us where we are now, Mr. Benjamin, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Armstrong. Thank you for having me on this show, and good evening to all the viewers. We are now at an event which started this Saturday morning, this past Saturday morning, 6:30 a.m. in Israel, which was basically Friday night, about midnight time here in the East Coast, with people preparing to go to synagogue, celebrate a Jewish holiday called Simchat Torah, join the Torah, the Jewish Bible, and the people who wanted to go to synagogue found themselves dead, massacred, kidnapped, and instead of being able to joy and rejoice with their families during this day, during this important day and solemn day, they are now, quite a number of them, in captivity in Gaza, those who are still alive. We're talking about, to date, about 900 people who have been killed. We have thousands of people who are injured, and the numbers are still going to grow because there are people that we haven't yet identified. They're still considered missing. This is the largest number of people killed per day. This is the largest massacre against Jews in a single day since the Holocaust. The largest number since the Holocaust. And this is in the Jewish land of Israel, the land of the Jewish people, the land of the Bible. And for doing what? For being Jews, for being Israelis, and it's not just Jews and Israelis. We're talking about foreigners as well, and people who are in Israel. Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, designated, by the way, also here in the United States and the European Union and other places around the world, without any provocation from Israel, without any reason, no provocation, no incitement from the Israeli side, decided to come like Daesh, like ISIS, in open vans, came and just gunned people down, men, women, children, elderly, taking a Holocaust survivor also, at least one that we know of, into captivity into Gaza, slaughtering them literally. Things that we've seen in ISIS.
Do you think they organized this alone? Because it seemed to be so well planned, Mr. Benjamin.
Look, Hamas, we all know, is backed by Iran, has very close relations with Iran, is funded by Iran, is trained by Iran, gets a lot of its ammunition also from Iran over the years. But Hamas has been around for too long. And now the world is seeing what Israel's been saying for so many years about who Hamas is and what it is and what they stand for. They stand for terrorism. And yes, this is part of the axis of evil, if you want, which is Hamas, it's Iran, it's Hezbollah, it's Islamic Jihad, it's ISIS, it's all of these. It's a whole network which is working together, which is not looking for anything but destruction and the killing of civilians and killing of innocent people for absolutely no reason.
You know, we saw earlier where the UAE and other Arab nations have absolutely condemned this and has even put on hold the finances, like hundreds of millions of dollars that they've used to fund Hamas for humanitarian reasons. Many nations are saying they're putting this on hold. What should these nations do that realize that they send money to Hamas and we have no idea what it's being used for? But when you look at the death and destruction of the last 48 hours, should they reconsider?
They should 100% reconsider, and they should understand that the money that they've been funneling to this organization is not going to the well-being of the Palestinians, the Palestinian people. This is going for the training of Hamas and for them being able to get more rockets and more grenades and more rifles and more ammunition to try and hit Israel. This is what they're doing, and this is where their money is going to, not to the real welfare of the Palestinians. Israel is doing far more for the welfare of the Palestinians than the Palestinians themselves are doing, led by Hamas in this regard. We've been allowing 20,000 workers daily coming out from Gaza into Israel to work in Israel. These are 20,000 families that are getting their money, their income, through working in Israel. And what is Hamas doing? Taking some of this money and funneling this towards terrorism. So absolutely, countries around the world, including the European Union and other countries as well that are funding Hamas, I think, and now have their wake-up call. Unfortunately, way too late for these hundreds of thousands, hundreds of innocent people who were murdered brutally by Hamas.
Well, obviously, public opinion, Mr. Benjamin, has absolutely switched and shown its sympathy and is outraged for what has happened to the Israeli people. But what about the decent Palestinians who wanted no part of what their leadership has done, and they're paying the ultimate price? Because when your prime minister says that the response to this will reverberate for generations to come, that means many Palestinians will die as a result of the savages that they have in their leadership.
Armstrong, let's just remember that it's not Israel that declared war here. It's Hamas that instigated this, and it's Hamas that declared war on Israel. And the Palestinian people have one entity to blame. This is Hamas. This is their leadership. They're the ones in control, and they're the ones who also should be pointing the finger in the direction of Hamas and calling Hamas to stop from this. And this is the way to go about it. I don't think that anybody in their right mind can come and say to Israel after this, no, hold your horses on this one. This is Israel's 9/11, multiplied at least 9 times if you make the maths of the size of the population in Israel compared to what we have in the United States. We're talking about 900 people to date, close to 1,000 already, who have been murdered. This is unprecedented, and I remind us all that Following the 9/11 attacks here in the States, how was the response of the international community? And how was the response first and foremost here in the United States? And then we saw what happened with ISIS and the way that the entire world is chasing ISIS to this day. This is the way that we should all be treating and looking at Hamas.
Do you take issue with the fact that the Biden administration did release the $6 billion to Iran recently, and they told them point blank, we're going to spend it any way that we like? Should we rethink our relationship with the Iranians?
The Iranians stand also for one thing, and this is the Iranian leadership. We have nothing with the Iranian people. We've used to have very good relations with the Iranian people, as we well remember. But the Iranian leadership as well is calling for the destruction of Israel. It's calling for the destruction of the United States. And it is working on a nuclear program, which is not a neutral one. It is not a civilian one. It is a military one. And there is only one reason they want that, and that's for destruction. Iran is standing for terrorism through directly and then through proxies, whether it's Hezbollah, whether it's the Houthis, whether it's others around the world. And Hezbollah and Iran is killing its own people and hanging its own people, if we're talking about homosexuals or lesbians or whatever it might be, that is not in the way that is liked and approved by the leadership of Iran. And this is what Iran is about, and we all need to be very, very well aware of this, including, as I said earlier, their ongoing support of Hamas and Hezbollah and everybody else in the area.
There was an impending deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia for Mideast peace, and Hamas attack is obviously going to sabotage any opportunity that you are to move forward on what would have been an incredible achievement with Saudi Arabia. Is that all, by all accounts, just dead in the water?
So I have maybe somewhat of a surprise, hopefully a pleasant one for you, that I think that in this regard as well, Hamas are achieving and will achieve the exact opposite. There is no daylight between Israel and Saudi Arabia and other countries in the Gulf in the way that we see Iran and the way that we see Hamas and the way that we see all these other entities that are out there to kill us and harm all of us. So this is actually bringing us all closer together, and it's going to bring us and the Saudis closer together as well, and perhaps even faster than was planned before. While Hamas may be thinking that a deal with Saudi is going to sideline them as an entity, and maybe that was part of the reason behind their thinking. This is actually going to bring about the exact opposite of it. It's going to bring a faster and closer and stronger relationship with countries across the region who understand what Hamas stands for and who all want to fight against this terrorism, which today struck Israel in a severe, severe way, and tomorrow could strike any other country in the world.
So what would it take to satisfy the Israeli people and his government to stop the missiles, to stop the brutality that we're about to see? What is it, your ultimate goal, where you would say this war is in it? And is it totally controlling Gaza? We know that you're shutting off the water supply, shutting down the infrastructure. We've heard those rumors coming out. But what will it take to satisfy you to cease fire and say this government is now satisfied?
Look, at this point in time, Armstrong, nobody's talking about a ceasefire. We are talking about, first and foremost, returning stability, calm, and security to the people of Israel. Up to now, we've had rounds of violence, as people used to call it. And then what we used to do is we used to put a Band-Aid or a patch on this to calm things down, hoping, perhaps, thinking that this is going to change things. But what we see now is that none of this has helped. On the contrary, this has just given Hamas more time to arm itself and to regroup. So what we're looking for doing now is to crushing Hamas as strongly and as fiercely as possible, so that they never pick up their head again, not on their own people and of course not on Israelis, and that not just they, but everybody else, including Iran, including Hezbollah, and any other entity out there that is interested in harming, whether it's Israelis or Americans or Saudis or anybody else, will not think again or think think again much more whether to even go down this route, and will be very regretful of ever even thinking about it.
What do you say finally?
This is the clear message that has to get across.
What do you say finally to these groups like Democracy for Socialism, where they say they stand with Palestine and they sympathize with Palestine, and these groups just seems to be so out of touch of the savagery and exactly what these, particularly for Americans, if they were in Israel at the time, just like the other Americans would have died, they could care less about your philosophy. They know nothing about what you believe. All they know is that you're either an American, are you an Israeli, you're Jewish, and their goal is to kill you, to rape you and beat you and just destroy your way of life, put you in captivity, to use you as a negotiating tool. What do you say to these young people who are just even after the attacks, even the Harvard Palestinian organizations at Harvard University are blaming Israel and condemning you for an attack that you did not provoke?
Look, the level of hypocrisy which is out there by some of these groups is just intolerable in so many different ways, and I think we should all say and go out against these organizations as fiercely as possible, because either they don't see what the reality is about, which maybe that's being a bit lenient towards them, or they are just plainly supporting the terrorists and supporting Hamas by these statements. Look, Israel has nothing against the Palestinian people, nothing whatsoever. We have something with Hamas. We have something with the Islamic Jihad. We have something against those who are out there to kill us. And this is very, very clear. And this is completely binary, completely clear and complicit to all of us in a very, very easy and simplistic way. Either you are peace-seeking and you want to work together, or you are out there to kill and murder civilians, innocent civilians, just because they're Jewish, just because they're Israeli. And we're seeing the rise of anti-Semitism across the world, including here, by the way. And for some people, this is just another excuse. So we need to come out in a very clear and loud voice, as we are receiving and hearing and getting a very, very strong support from here within the United States, from Congress, from the administration, from communities across the country, left, right, and center, with no regard, regardless of the political affiliation, of supporting Israel in its just fight right now and denouncing terrorism, denouncing extremism, and giving Israel the backing that it needs to continue fighting terrorism on behalf of every single person in the free world, including here in the United States. This is our fight. This is your fight. We're all in this together. And this is a message that we all need to understand. And yes, also a message that needs to be passed across to those groups who think that they're speaking in the name of human rights, but they're actually doing the exact opposite.
The Honorable Eliav Benjamin, Deputy Chief of Missions at the Embassy of Israel, thank you so much for your time. Your country's in our prayers. And thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, Armstrong.
So, Andrew, your quick thoughts on this. We've got about a minute left on what he had to say.
Far more than the words. You could just see it on the man's face, what that country's going through. You could feel that emotion. I feel for him. I feel for their country. I pray for them. I've been in contact with friends over there. This is a righteous thing they're doing, going after Hamas. But again, like a lot of the other things we talked about, and you pressed him on, we know what a reoccupied Gaza looks like because we've seen that. We know from history fighting terrorism is a bloody exercise in whack-a-mole. You got to go after the finances and the support structures. I support our Jewish friends. I know we all do in their quest to get justice here. But there's a lot of long-term questions that need very serious answers and level-headed thinking.
Bruce?
I think he's forgotten the military understanding you can't kill your way out of a war. The idea that there's no diplomacy, it's off the table. There doesn't seem to be anything in his remarks that would suggest they will stop short of killing every single Palestinian. Now, there are evil people there, but they're innocents as well. And I don't think this is likely to lead to any kind of reconciliation. I think it'll just be intermission before the next war.
You know, I remember 9/11 and how people lost their lives, just innocent people on airplanes and buildings, just died for no reason at all. And I can understand anyone who's in that situation and why they could see no end in sight to this violence until you lay that enemy to rest. So, you know, I'm not of the mindset, I understand what Bruce is saying, but you know, when you make that a kind of attack and destroy, I heard those parents cry out for their children. their daughters kidnapped, raped, treated like animals. Listen, when you do that when you instigate something like that, there's a price that you pay. I pray that innocent people don't die, but those savages will get just what they deserve. And I make no apologies for it. I'm Armstrong Williams. Thank you so much for joining us for this edition of the Armstrong Williams Show.